I want to give y'all a quick update on my great nephew. As I mentioned last week, our niece, Meira Walby. Now she's called Prupus. Her husband's name is Prupus, but Nay Walby. She had a baby very, very premature, micro-preemie, and it's been a mixed week, and he still needs our prayers. So I am asking all of y'all to include Tinok ben Meira. Tinok is the name for a baby, an unnamed baby, the son of Meira. Include him in your prayers, and may he merit a complete and total recovery, and should have no lingering effects from his premature, precocious entrance to the world. It's Parshas Emor. It's a very full Parsha. We have a staggering 56 mitzvos, most of them relating to the Kohen, but the Parsha ends with the laws of the menorah lighting and the laws of the showbread and the very unusual and tragic story of the blasphemer. So we have at the beginning of the Parsha all the laws of the Kohen. At the end of the Parsha, the blasphemer. In the middle, we read about the festivals. In 4 places in the Torah, we read about the festivals, Parshas Mishpatim, and now Parshas Emor. And then again in the book of Numbers, Parshas Pinchas, and finally in Parshas Re'eh. And it starts off with Shabbos, which is the first of the festivals, even though we don't typically think that Shabbos is a festival, because Shabbos is not, so to speak, remembering an event that happened. It's not contingent upon the calendar. It just happens whether we like it or not. It's interesting in the prayers that we say on Shabbos, we say, Mikadesh HaShabbos, God sanctifies the Shabbos. It's holy, it's sacrosanct, whether we like it or not. Whereas on the festivals, we say, Mikadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. God sanctifies Israel and the special holidays, because we have a say in determining the holidays, we have a say in determining the calendar. So typically Shabbos and festivals are different. When it enumerates the festivals in our Parsha, it begins with Shabbos, and then it proceeds to talk about Passover, Pesach, and the mitzvah to eat matzah, and it interjects with the laws of the Omer. We bring the Omer offering on the second day of Pesach, and then we count the Omer from Pesach to Shavuos. On Shavuos, we have the 2 bread offering, the Shtei Alechem, and then it continues Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres and the mitzvos of Sukkot, the 4 species that we shake, and of course the mitzvah to sit in the sukkah on Sukkot. I want to focus on the mitzvah of counting the Omer. As you perhaps know, we are right now between the periods of Passover, of Pesach, and Shavuos, and last night was the 30th day of the Omer, so we're 60% of the way from Passover to Shavuos. We have a mitzvah in our Parsha, chapter 23, verses 9 through 17. It tells us that when the nation enters the land and they have to bring this Omer offering the day after the first day of Passover. And when they do that, all the new grain from the New Year's crop is now permitted, meaning when you have the new cycle of the crops, you cannot eat the new crop, the new grain, until the Omer offering is brought on the second day of Passover. And then we read, you should count. You should count from the day after the first day of Passover, meaning the second day of Passover. From the day that you bring the Omer offering, you count 7 full weeks until you finish 7 full weeks, which is 49 days. Then you have the 50th day, and then you bring the Shtei Alechem, the offering of the festival of Shavuos. This is one of the 630 mitzvahs in the Torah, is the mitzvah to count the Omer from the Omer offering, which is the barley offering brought on the second day of Passover, all the way to the festival of Shavuos, which is 50 days later. We count 49 days, and on the 50th day, which is the following day, which is the festival of Shavuos, then we bring that other offering, the Shtei Alechem, the wheat flour offering. Now, there's a very interesting comment in the Ramban in our Parsha. He tells us that really the festivals of Pesach, which of course marks the Exodus, And the festival of Shavuos, which marks the Sinai revelation that happened 50 days later, they're actually one big festival. It's one big festival. A festival of Exodus, of redemption, of salvation and elevation at Sinai. And the days in between, meaning the days of the Omer, it's like the Chol HaMoed, it's the intermediate days that bridge the two bookends of the festival. Now, this is a very interesting idea because it recasts the connection between Passover and Shavuos, and certainly the days in between the days of the Omer, it recasts it in a different light. The nation, they were enslaved for hundreds of years in Egypt. And they were miserable, and they were enslaved and oppressed. And the Almighty performed a very long series of miracles and empowered Moshe, go save the Jewish people, go to Pharaoh. We know the story. 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn, the paschal offering, the blood on the doorposts. The nation leaves with an outstretched arm. Biyad chazakah, with a strong hand. The Exodus. We bid adieu to Egypt. The Ramban tells us this is just the beginning of a long festival. This is just the beginning of a long transformation. After the Exodus, and we left Egypt, never to return, we didn't quite finish the job. Now we do know. 7 days later, Egypt makes a dramatic reappearance. They pursue them. We have the splitting of the sea. That's the 7th day of Pesach. But the Ramban says, well, still the job's not done. And they leave Egypt for good. They collect all the booty after the Jewish people walk through the dry land. The water split into walkable paths. The Egyptians follow them. The water crashes down upon them. They collect all the goodies. They travel to Mara, and they have the water sweetened for them in Mara. They are eating manna, and they have the war against Amalek, and they arrive at Sinai, and they get the Torah. That's the completion of the Exodus. This is a story of redemption. This is a story of unshackling ourselves from the bondage that we had to Egypt. Until the nation received Torah, until the dramatic theophany at Sinai, the Jewish people were not quite free. The Mishnah tells us true freedom is only with Torah. So this is a festival, a big expanded festival of freedom, and it unfolds sequentially. First you have Pesach, which is of course the beginning part, and then at the end you have Shavuos, which is at Sinai, and then the Omer. That's like the glue that connects these two bookends. The nation was physically liberated from Egypt on the first day of Passover, and then they just reaffirmed it 7 days later, and that's Passover. And the nation experienced spiritual liberation when they received the Torah at Sinai. It's interesting, if you look at the Egyptian enslavement, it was a hybrid, or it was an amalgam of multiple different types of enslavement. They were physically subjugated to their Egyptian masters, but they were also spiritually subjected to Egypt and the Egyptian way of life. You recall perhaps the last Parsha in the book of Genesis, Parsha's Vayechi. The first comment in Rashi, he notes that there isn't a break between the end of Parshas Vayigash and the beginning of Parshas Vayechi. Every Parsha in the Torah, there's a paragraph break between the preceding Parsha and the succeeding Parsha. Parshas Vayechi, it's like one line. You have to find it in the middle of a big block of text in a Torah scroll. Why is it closed? It's closed because in Parshas Vayechi, Jacob dies. And when Jacob dies, the heart of Israel closed. Because the enslavement began with the death of Jacob. So if you look again, this is the first comment in Rashi in Parshas Vayechi. When did the enslavement start? With the death of Jacob. You fast forward to chapter 6 of Exodus, and the Torah tells us, it's seemingly not relevant, it tells us the age of Levi when he died. It doesn't mention any of the other brothers, any of the other sons of Jacob when they died. So Rashi asks the question, well, why does it tell us the age of Levi when he died? And Rashi answers, well, Levi outlived all of his brothers. And when Levi died, that's when the enslavement started. And therefore the Torah wants to mark a milestone in the story of enslavement with the death of Levi. And of course, I would ask the question, wait a minute, just a few chapters earlier, you told me that the death of Jacob marks the beginning of the enslavement. Now you tell me that the death of Levi begins enslavement. And the answer is, there's two types of enslavement. There's physical enslavement, and that began only with the death of Levi. The spiritual enslavement, that began with the death of Jacob. Well, if Egypt is two-tiered enslavement, the Exodus is two-tiered as well. So there's a spiritual Exodus, there's a physical Exodus, there's Passover, there's Shavuos. It's interesting, if you look at the story of the Exodus, a lot of the storyline is focused on the discussion, the dialogue between Moshe and God when God instructs Moshe at the burning bush, go to Egypt and go save your brethren. And Moshe responds with a long series of objections. I'm not worthy. I can't speak properly. They won't believe me. What name should I say? Send Aaron instead. And to one of the objections, this is in chapter 3, verse 12 of Exodus, Moshe says, who am I? I'm not worthy. And the Jewish people, they're not worthy either of being saved. And God responds, I will be with you. And this is the sign that I sent you. When you take the nation out of Egypt, you will worship me on this mountain. The burning bush is at Sinai. And the Exodus is linked to Sinai. The justification for the Exodus is the Sinai experience. This is one big festival, the Ramban tells us. And that's the meaning of this very unusual mitzvah. We don't really have mitzvahs like this, to count days. All the commentaries tell us. The reason why we have this mitzvah to count days, because we started something and we see at the end of this long journey, we're going to consummate it, we're going to finish it, we're going to seal the deal, and we're anticipating it and we're yearning for it and we're counting and building up towards it. And there's a beautiful comment in the Sefer HaChinuch, which is the classic medieval work of mitzvos. And on this mitzvah of counting the Omer, which is mitzvah number 306, he has a beautiful essay on the meaning of this mitzvah. And he writes that the essence of the Jewish people is only Torah. And why did God create heaven and earth? Only for Torah. And why did God take the nation out of Egypt? It's only so that they accept the Torah at Sinai. And therefore, because the essence of the Jewish nation is Torah, and the purpose of redemption of the Exodus was the Sinai revelation, we're instructed to count. You leave Egypt, the next day the count begins. After a count of 49 days, you are ready. The next day, indeed, is the Sinai revelation. Now, my daughter, my older daughter, Miriam, she's not infatuated with organized stooling. Maybe the understatement of the year. So the past couple of years, she's had this massive board where it's titled, I'll tell you what it's called, When Will This Torture End? She's a little dramatic. When will this torture end? And then she has, like every day, she gets home from school and marches off a day. Apparently, there's only like 20 days left to school. And many have questioned, why are we counting up? Maybe we should count down. Start with 49 and we're getting closer. Instead of last night being day 30, well, how many days left? You have 19 days left. And the answer is many answers, but many of them are along these lines. We're not idly counting days. During the period of the Omer, it's like part of this grand festival of freedom, of redemption, of unshackling the bonds of Egypt. So we're not supposed to just sit around and wait. We're supposed to prepare. And every day we're getting closer. Why are we getting closer? Not just because some time has passed. Your clock now has crossed 24 hours since yesterday. Oh, you're closer. Every day you're trying to change yourself and elevate yourself and uplift yourself and remove obstacles to make yourself worthy of experiencing, of reenacting the Sinai revelation. So if we're just killing time and we're just counting down, then it makes sense to just start from 49 and make your way down. But when it's actually building ourselves, preparing ourselves for the receiving of Torah at Sinai, we're not the inmate Xing off days until freedom. We're actually climbing the ladder one rung at a time, preparing for that momentous reenactment of Sinai on Shavuos. Now, it's interesting. My grandfather, blessed memory, used to always say, preparing is always a part of every mitzvah. Now, of course, this is an idea well known. There's apparently a line attributed to Abraham Lincoln. If I had 6 hours to chop the tree, the first 5 hours I'm sharpening my axe. You've heard that before. Wisdom from honest Abe. But there's a theme that we see by older people who are serious about their spiritual lives. You don't just jump into a mitzvah. You prepare. The early pious ones would spend an hour before prayer preparing. We have the whole month of Elul before Rosh Hashanah to prepare. But every mitzvah, there's a preparation where you recognize what you're about to do. You know, at the end of the Parsha, we have the mitzvah of the lechem hapanim of the showbreads. It was placed upon the table, the shulchan. And it was baked once a week, 12 very large, boat-shaped loaves of bread. Each one was like 3 feet long, half a foot tall. And they'll be placed upon the table, the shulchan. And then after a week, the new batch would be placed on the shulchan on the table, and it would replace the old batch, which will be eaten by the Kohan and by the priests. But when this is introduced in our Parsha, chapter 24, verse 5, the verse has some extra words. The verse says, you should take the flour and bake it into 12 loaves. Now, if you and I would read that, we would say, okay, well, it says take the flour, bake it into loaves. But the commentaries observe that you could have omitted some words. You could have said, you bake the loaves. We know that, obviously need flour for it. And what do you mean? What does it mean to take the flour? Those words are not extra or not necessary. They are extra. So one of the commentaries says that this teaches us that if you're about to make the showbreads that are going to be in the sanctuary, on the table, it's going to be before God, so to speak. It's going to be a receptacle of divine blessing. You don't just have flour and just make it. Even when you're taking the flour, It's not part of the mitzvah. There is no ceremony or any blessing that you say for taking the flour. But that should also be part of the mitzvah process. I'm doing something. I'm preparing for something. I'm going to take the flour with a seriousness, with a recognition of what I'm about to do. The Talmud tells a story that there was a crisis. There was a crisis. There were orphans whose fathers had unfortunately passed. And there was no one to teach them Torah. So if some young boy had a father, then he had someone to teach him Torah. What about the orphan? It's a terrible tragedy. There's no one to teach them Torah. So the Talmud tells us, this is in the book of Bava Metzia on page 85b, that Rabbi Chia, he had a solution. So what did he do? He planted flax to make linen. Now, if I told you, plant flax, it's very distant from teaching orphans Torah. But he planted flax to make a net. And he made the net to trap a deer. And he slaughtered the deer and gave the food to poor people. And he took the hide of the deer that he slaughtered with the nets that he made, with the flax that he planted. He took that hide and wrote Torah on it, wrote like books of Torah. And the commentaries say, wait a minute. Couldn't you just go to the store? Couldn't he buy off-the-rack nets or off-the-rack hides? No, he's teaching us a principle. When you're about to embark on a very important spiritual journey, you want to make sure that even the preparation of the preparation for that mitzvah is going to be pure. It's going to be with a proper attitude. It's going to be with the gravity of what you're about to do. So he didn't subsist with anyone else's nets. He said, I'm going to plant. I'm going to put like a special prayer when I plant the flax, so that way I can have good nets, so I could trap the deer and end up with the most pristinely holy Torah paraphernalia and accoutrements to be able to teach Torah to our nation. And this was the beginning of organized, institutionalized, and universal education in our nation's history. We got to it, 1800 years before the rest of the world. So this is an idea. Preparation is important. Preparation is paramount. Every mitzvah that you do, you prepare for it. I read that the Gaon of Vilna said, if you made an axe with the most noble intentions, and you took the axe and you chopped down some trees with the most noble intentions, and with those trees you built a shul, a house of prayer for God. When everyone would pray in that house of prayer, their thoughts would be entirely devotion to God. They wouldn't have other thoughts interjected. Sometimes you pray. The joke that they used to say in yeshiva, why are the Jews so good in business? Because they have 3 times a day where they could think about nothing but business. They have the prayer. It's a joke. It's a terrible joke. But they have the prayer it's just that no other thoughts are intervening. They just 100% focus on their business. That's the joke, but it's a terrible tragedy where you're talking to God, but your mind's elsewhere. If the preparation for the prayer house would be with the highest, most noble intentions, then there wouldn't be stray thoughts. This I loved. The Chazon Ish, the founder of the modern Torah movement in Israel. So he lived a very Spartan life, very austere, and he had very few possessions. But I read that he had 2 sets of Talmud. One of them was like the nice updated set of Talmud. with all the extra commentaries in the back. And one of them was a less beautiful edition of the Talmud. And he used that one. And the reason why he used that one, like why would you use a set of Talmud that's not like with the clearest paper and the best ink and the best layout? It was from the Spira brothers. When they made their set of Talmud, when they prepared the metal plates to be used in the printing press to produce the Talmud, they took every plate from every page of Talmud and they dunked it in the mikvah. No, that's not needed. You don't need to take the metal plates that are used in the printing press. That does not need to go to the mikvah. Mikvah, we learned many laws of purity and impurity. A lot of people need to go to the mikvah. Not this, but it's the idea of preparing. Preparations for holiness is very important. When you take the flour, it's not just taking flour. The Torah tells us there's something special. There's no mitzvah. Take it with a sense of gravity. That's across the board. With every mitzvah, it's important to prepare. We have one mitzvah that the whole mitzvah is about preparation. The counting of the Omer. It's a mitzvah that we may need to prepare for this mitzvah, but the whole mitzvah is about preparation. To count in anticipation. To count upward. To build upward, to progress upward towards the state of readiness for Sinai. Accordingly, it's been a universal custom to do things during these days that help get us in the right mindset for Sinai, to help prepare ourselves for the end cap of this grand festival, the festival of redemption that began with Pesach, with Passover, and will come to a crescendo, a climactic crescendo in a few weeks. So, for example, there's a custom to study Pirkei Avos, the chapters of the fathers. That's like the best preparation for Sinai. That's like almost the Genesis. Genesis is the book of the forefathers. The forefathers didn't have the sign of revelation, but they were the preparation. Well, these are like the lessons, the chapters of the forefathers. Some have a custom to study the 48 ways to wisdom during the 49 days of the counting of the Omer. Well, what about the extra day? So I said, well, maybe the extra day is like the allowance. It's the paid time off. It's the one day that you could mail in. But others have said, no. That's the day before Shavuot, the last day we got to review all 48. Or some have suggested, well, the first day is where you plan, where you envision that 48 rung ladder that you're about to ascend. But that's a common universal custom. Others say, well, the best way to prepare for Sinai is to just study Torah. How do you prepare for Torah with Torah? And in fact, that's what the nation themselves did after the Exodus. Well, they have 7 days later, the showdown at the sea, and then they travel for 3 days with no water, and they end up in a place called Mara, and the waters are bitter. And Moshe is shown a stick, and he throws the stick into the waters, and the waters sweeten. And the verse concludes, there, meaning in Mara, this is in chapter 14, I believe, or 15 of Exodus, there they received the law and the statutes. And Rashi tells us, the Talmud tells us, there were some laws that the nation received 10 days after the Exodus, meaning 40 days before the sign of revelation. They got some laws. They got the laws of Shabbos, the laws of Para Aduma, the red heifer. The Talmud tells us they got the laws of honoring your father and mother, and they got the general laws of jurisprudence. This is very interesting because this is almost like a down payment, an early deposit of Sinai? The commentaries ask the question, like, they're in Mara, it's 10 days after the Exodus. They've said goodbye to the Egyptians for good this time. Why do they need to have some mitzvos? And the Maharal, and this is really what Rashi says, they needed to prepare for Sinai. They need to prepare for Torah, and the only way to prepare for Torah is with Torah. So they need to get some mitzvos before Sinai, some laws of Torah before Sinai, so they can have something to occupy themselves with in order to prepare themselves for the Sinai revelation. And the Maharal even explains they got these 3 different mitzvos, meaning the laws of Shabbos and the laws of Paraduma, the red heifer, and the general laws, the interpersonal laws of the Torah. Because these are 3 different brain types. Some people like the laws of Shabbos, which is so many different laws. And they like to just study all the preponderance of different laws. And then you have the Paraduma, which is the kind of person who wants only one law. But it's just profoundly deep. And it's really unfathomable how deep it is. Because the deeper you go, the deeper you realize it actually is. And that's why no one could possibly encapsulate all of the insight of the red heifer. It's beyond human intellect. It's only one law, but the deeper you go, the deeper you discover it is. And they have the laws, the general laws of jurisprudence, because that's not so many laws per se, and that's not really one very deep law, but it's very fine and very nuanced. And there's very slight subtleties that separate one law from the other. And there was variety. Everyone needs to study Torah to occupy themselves with Torah to prepare for Sinai, but everyone has to find the type of Torah that speaks to them. You have to find the right Torah to occupy yourself with, to have the pastime of the Omer, because you need that in order to receive the Torah at Sinai. And therefore, us too, if we're going to prepare for Torah, for Sinai, we're going to, so to speak, utilize the days, the intermediate days, the days of the Omer properly. It's a good idea. It's an extra good idea to busy yourself, to occupy yourself with Torah. But I want to share maybe a different idea. The Talmud tells us that this period of the Omer was also a tragic period in our nation's history. The great Rabbi Akiva, the greatest of the sages of the Mishnah, he had 12,000 pairs of students. The students studied, each one had a pair, and therefore there were 12,000 pairs, 24,000 students all told. And they all died in a plague because they did not exhibit sufficient honor to each other. And when did they die? They all died in this period between Passover and Shavuot. And that's why these are days of mourning. And that's why the law tells us that this is not a time to get married. There's no weddings. We don't do weddings. Weddings are times of celebration. We're kind of mourning. And the custom is to not get a haircut or a shave. And that's why if you're on torchzoom.com Tuesdays at 8 p.m., you see I have a nice, thick, bushy NHL playoff beard. I met someone today. He's like, the beard's kind of intense. Beard's intense. And now my mustache is now going into the food, which I kind of like. It makes it more flavorful. Why? Because this is a time of mourning. But the law says that the mourning ends on the 33rd day of the Omer. Why? Because on the 33rd day of the Omer, the students of Rabbi Akiva ceased dying. They were dying from Pesach to Shavuot, but it stopped on the 33rd day of the Omer. Now, this whole idea is kind of mind-bending because we know Rabbi Akiva was the author of the idea that to love your fellow as yourself, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which we read, of course, last week, that is the principle of all of Torah. Rabbi Akiva himself was the one who professed, who preached that the imperative to honor and to love and to hold your fellow in high regard and high esteem. So how is it possible that his own students were lacking in this regard? Now, it's also interesting. We know that the Sinai revelation, we read about it in the book of Exodus. But before the Sinai revelation, there's a very famous comment, or there's a very famous verse that tells us that the nation encamped around the mountain. But in Hebrew, you can have the singular or the plural. And it doesn't say that the nation, vayichanu, they plural, encamped around the mountain. Rather, it's like vayichan, and he, singular, encamped around the mountain. And Rashi tells us that the nation was so united as one, it's like one person. Like one man with one heart, with one purpose. They were totally united. So there's a certain, I guess, tragic juxtaposition. On one hand, during this period, the nation, in the original Omer, they were blending themselves together. They were binding themselves to each other to the point where they became, before Sinai, the day before Sinai, or at least the days before Sinai, they became like one person. And yet, during the same period, the students of Rabbi Akiva perished. Why? Because there was an insufficient love and respect and harmony and unity amongst them. But there's another idea. On the 33rd day of the Omer, they stopped dying. Now, separate and apart from that, apparently, the 33rd day of the Omer, which is, of course, known as Lag BaOmer. Lag is the Lamed and the Gimel. Lamed is 30, Gimel is 3. 30 plus 3 is 33. That's also the day that one of Rabbi Akiva's students, Rabbi Shimon, otherwise known as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that's the day that he died. And the biggest Jewish festival in the world, the biggest Jewish pilgrimage in the world, is to Meron, which is a mountain in northern Israel, on Lag BaOmer, which is the day, the yard site, the day of the passing, the Hilula of Rabbi Shimon. And somehow this is all connected to the events of the students of Rabbi Akiva. They stopped dying on the 33rd day, which is also the day that Rabbi Shimon passed. So there's a very interesting idea that I want to share with you that I think could be something that could help ground us, or at least could be an insight that could help make our Omer period more productive and more elevating and get us in the right frame of mind for the Sinai revelation, which is upcoming. The students of Rabbi Akiva, they had some sort of corruption of their interpersonal character. They didn't demonstrate sufficient honor to each other. And that's why they died. But there's one day that they didn't die, the day that they ceased dying. And that is the same day that Rabbi Shimon passed away. And that's his yard site, his Hilula. Those things are actually connected. What happened on the 33rd day of the Omer? So Rabbi Shimon was a very important figure in our history, not only because he's one of the Tanaim, the authors of the Mishnah, and he's one of the students of Rabbi Akiva, but he is also the primary author of the Zohar. Now, the Zohar, you know, that's the authoritative book of Kabbalah, poorly translated as mysticism. And this book was finished the same day that Rabbi Shimon passed away. So the celebration almost, the pilgrimage, the festival of Lag BaOmer, as it relates to Rabbi Shimon, it's his parting, so to speak, which a sage, when they die, they're not dead. They're just transitioning to the heavenly academy. But it's also the celebration of the completion of the Zohar. The Zohar shows us that every part of the Torah is absolutely bursting with insight and with meaning. The essence of the Zohar is to teach us, or is to reveal to us a little bit about the secrets of the Torah. You can have parts of the Torah that seem to be mundane. It's to be a story that seems totally irrelevant to us. But you discover that it's actually full of these incredible, profound, unfathomable secrets. And this, perhaps, is almost the rectification of what happened, of what went wrong with the students of Rabbi Akiva. The students of Rabbi Akiva did not show sufficient honor to each other. On some level, they regarded their fellow student as not being so important. And Rabbi Shimon, he's the one who always shows us there's importance and there's profundity, even in things that you would otherwise think is not important. Now, it goes a little bit deeper. We know, and this is something that I spoke about a few times, in some memorable podcasts in the past. So if you don't know what I'm referring to, send me an email and I'll send you the link. There are exactly 600,000 letters in the Torah scroll. And there are exactly 600,000 root souls of our people. And that's not a coincidence, because every Jewish soul has a corresponding letter in the Torah. And if you have a Torah scroll that's missing a single letter, that Torah scroll is invalid. Similarly, every Jewish soul is part of this beautiful tapestry, this beautiful panoply of this wonderful and glorious nation. And in the Zohar, we discover that there are secrets in every corner of the Torah. And that should reveal to us that every single Jewish soul is full of such holiness and such unfathomable power. Just as there's parts of the Torah that we see them and we don't see how it's valuable and how it's meaningful and how it's profound, so too, in every one of those souls that correspond to those letters, there's secrets, maybe invisible to the eye, but it's worthy of analysis, it's worthy of study, it's worthy of admiration. And thus, we have this one day where our perspective is adjusted. And we can recalibrate how we view other people. And yes, maybe there was a shortcoming that the students of Rabbi Akiva had, but comes along this day, and what this day reveals is that every part of the Torah and every part of this nation is absolutely worthy of admiration. So I think a very valuable exercise to do during this time of preparation is to take the lesson of Rabbi Akiva, that there's a principle of Torah that's to love your fellow as yourself, and to take the lesson of Rabbi Shimon, that even the parts of Torah, even the parts of the nation that don't seem to be resplendently, brilliantly worthy of admiration, and to know and to recognize that there's absolute diamonds everywhere. and to accord honor to every other person, and to realize that every single person, every single Jew is indispensable, is absolutely needed. And without every Jew, we cannot have the acceptance of Torah. The nation was like one man with one purpose at Sinai. They were united as one. All 600,000 were in complete unison, in complete agreement for what they want to do. And only under those conditions could they receive a Torah of 600,000 letters. To see the blessing in every person, in every Jew. To see the worth and the honor and the indispensability of everyone else. It's hard. It's not easy. We're not going to claim that we're better than the students of Rabbi Akiva who perished. We're not going to make that claim. It's hard to get out of your own little bubble and to see the value of others. It's very hard. But that is something that we can focus on during these days and hopefully make our way closer and closer towards the ideal of ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, the ideal that we can gather at Sinai, like one man with one purpose. A powerful idea for how to make the Omer days more productive and how we can do our part to bring about the culmination of this double-ended, double-capped, so to speak, festival of redemption and freedom. Let's get to this week's dilemma. It's a painful dilemma for me because I always want to argue with this conclusion of the dilemma. But in the spirit of full disclosure, I think I may be wrong, as much as I dislike that. So, of course, we're all here to achieve great things. We all want to achieve greatness. And that means that there's work for us to do. We're not there. But we hope and we aspire to get there. And when you start off, you kind of have a mixed bag, right? You have some qualities and some shortcomings and some things where it's kind of maybe neutral. You have a little bit of this, a little bit of that. What's the perspective? Should you try to specialize or generalize? Should you try to work and develop and burnish your qualities? Or should you try to take your shortcomings, your flaws, and elevate them and rectify them to become more well-rounded? There's two philosophies of how to achieve greatness. You could be very targeted in one area, or you could be a generalist, more well-rounded. Which one is preferable? So this is Parsha, we find the answer. Part of the laws of the Kohen at the beginning of the Parsha are the disqualification of a crippled, God forbid, disfigured, God forbid, or blemished Kohen from doing work in the temple. Chapter 21, verse 17, speak to Aaron and tell him any one of your descendants who has a mum, who has a blemish, they cannot offer any service or sacrifices in the temple. And the commentaries observe, many of the commentaries say the same thing, that the message is to Aaron that this applies by his descendants. This is like a tacit proof or promise that Aaron himself will never be subject to these blemishes. And then it starts to list. Someone, God forbid, is blind or lame or has misshapen limbs or organs or broken leg or broken arm or a hunchback or someone's really short like a dwarf, has growths in all these different places. It lists 12 different blemishes that will disqualify a Kohen from doing work in the temple. And then it adds a verse that's like an inclusive verse. Someone has a blemish, and the Talmud tells us that's any blemish at all, any physical impairment, any physical disfigurement, they're disqualified from doing work in the temple. And the Rambam, he counts a total of 140 different blemishes that would disqualify a Kohen. Now, of course, the question that we have to ask is, wait a minute. Why should someone who was born with a disfigurement, God forbid, or some sort of impairment or blemish, why should they not have a right to do work in the temple? It's a good question, but I ask the same question about myself. I'm a standard issue Israelite. And there's nothing standard about any Jew, but still, Israelite nonetheless. So if I want to do work in the temple, there's nothing I can do. Absolutely nothing. The closest you could get is if your daughter marries a Kohen, then your grandchildren, your descendants, can maybe do work in the temple. But otherwise, you're just out of luck. So it's okay. So if someone's blemished, God forbid, they're just no worse than the Israelite. But still, it bothers us. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have the Special Olympics. Why should someone who is blemished or has some sort of disability, why should they not be allowed to do work in the temple? So the famous idea, we've mentioned it in the past, from Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch says that if someone who was blemished did work in the temple, then someone who visited the temple would see someone who has some disability and will say, you know what? This is the only job that they could get. There's some people who they can only get, a felon, or someone doesn't pass a drug test, or someone doesn't have a social security number. Only something low paid, cash, minimum wage job. So it would be very disgraceful for the temple, for God's house, for people to have that attitude that someone who is blemished, this is the only place that would take them. And truthfully, of course, it's the most prestigious role in the world, to be a servant of God in his temple. But to prevent misunderstandings, someone who is a Kohen who was blemished is invalidated. That's the idea of Rav Hirsch. I think it makes a lot of sense, even though I understand that people with the modern sensibilities will bristle at it. One of the shortcomings, one of the blemishes, I shouldn't say shortcomings, one of the blemishes that disqualify a Kohen is if they are sarua. Now that's a word you don't see very often. So Rashi explains, what does sarua mean? And he says, she'echad me'evarav gadol mechavero. One of his limbs or organs is larger than its corresponding one. Humans are mostly symmetrical. You got 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 hands, and so on. Someone who's sarua is when they have 1 large eye, this is Rashi's example, and 1 small eye. 1 big arm, 1 long arm, and 1 short arm, and so on. And the commentaries tell something very profound. If someone has small eyes, they are not disqualified. If someone has big eyes, they're not disqualified. If someone has small ears, nothing wrong with that. Large ears. We were always told growing up that you have large ears is a sign of intelligence. I don't know if it's actually true. I think Wolbies have maybe a little bit larger ears than usual. So it was the way of comforting, it's a sign of intelligence. Is that true? I don't know. Large ears is fine. Having 1 big one and 1 small one, that's a problem. When there's an asymmetry, when it's lopsided, when it's not proportional. And the commentators extend this idea that the ideal is when there's symmetry, when there's proportionality. And if someone has isolated greatness in one area but not in the other, that is actually a blemish. When we grow, it should be holistic. It shouldn't be that we have greatness in one area and in other areas we have something very small corresponding. Now, if someone's just small all around, that's okay. But if someone's big in one area and small in the other area, that is a blemish. That's what the commentaries observe from this idea of the sarua, one of the blemishes that disqualify a Kohen. My grandfather, blessed memory, used to say that in every step of growth in Torah, you have to have a corresponding step in growth in kindness. And in truth, the Talmud says that. If someone's a great Torah scholar, but when it comes to kindness, that's not my thing. That's not my area of expertise. That, the Talmud tells us, it's like someone who doesn't believe in God. How could it be that someone is so great in Torah, but when it comes to interpersonal kindness, they just don't have it? That is a problem. And it's equivalent to not believing in God, the Talmud tells us. Similarly, you have a step in Torah, it must be paired with a corresponding step in humility. And the example that he used to bring is that when we pray, we have the Shemona Esrei, 18 benedictions, really 19 if you count. And we bow 4 times, twice toward the beginning, twice towards the end. That's the law. But what if someone is a high priest? A high priest bows for every blessing. You're greater, you must have greater humility, greater submission before God. And what about a king? When the king bows, he just stays down from the beginning of prayer to the end of the prayer. You have so much greatness, you must have ever more humility. Otherwise, it's imbalanced. It's lopsided. And the reason why I struggle with this is I kind of like the idea. I'm enchanted by extraordinary ability and still in one area. And the whole idea of being well-rounded, I don't know, it doesn't excite me to be well-rounded. And I'm kind of intrigued by someone who has real outlier ability or development in one area. And it doesn't bother me so much, that the other eye, so to speak, is much smaller. But I think that this is correct. When there's disproportion, it's problematic. We know that Esav, he was outstanding in one area more than his brother Jacob. He had the mitzvah of honoring your father. He excelled even greater than Jacob did. But of course, Jacob is greater. And the description of Jacob is that he's tam, which means he's wholesome, which means he's well-rounded. And there are many other examples of this idea. I think we mentioned this in the past. If someone has a massive bread, like a loaf of bread that covers the whole table, and it's gleaming, and it's fresh, and it's sumptuous looking, but one of the kids grabbed a little bit off and bit off a part of it. And you have a small, couple-day-old, lumpy-looking little roll, but it's perfect. Which one do you make the blessing on first? You make a blessing on the shalim, on the full one. Even though the other one is much more impressive. It's impressive, but it's not complete. That is a problem. Incompletion, it's a blemish. Asymmetry, imbalance, is a blemish. We must strive. Now, I'm saying this, I know it's true, even though it bothers me. I apologize. I'll be honest with you. We must strive to achieve holistic greatness in all areas. I was thinking of ways to explain this. Like if you have a 1,000-piece puzzle and only one piece is missing, that's the only thing you'll notice. And it'll just jump out at you. When you finish something, when you complete something, when it's done and it's finished, that is something to celebrate. Day 2 of Genesis was a very productive day. It does not say that it was good, ki tov, because the job was not finished. Monday's work was incomplete. Twice on Tuesday, it says ki tov. Why? Because the work of Monday and the work of Tuesday were both finished. Goodness is assigned on a finished job. I thank you for your attention in this week's Parsha podcast. Parsha's Emor. Next week, we finish the book of Leviticus with a double installment of Behar and Bechukosai. This is the 1 week out of 4 that was a single Parsha. A lot to study. All sorts of different angles to study this wonderful Parsha. Hopefully, we will all have a productive Lag BaOmer and an elevated rest of our Omer and be ready and primed for the festival of Shavuot, which is upcoming. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Super duper splendid rest of your week. And have a meaningful and happy and restful and quiescent Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll gather together again around a cackling fire with a Coke Zero and maybe some salted peanuts. For another edition of the Parsha Podcast, my address is rabbiwalby@gmail.com.